Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Jerry Scullion and I'm a human-centred design practitioner based in the wonderful city of Dublin, Ireland. In this podcast, we dive into the fascinating world of design and technology in society. And if you're new here, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or the follow button if you're on Spotify to get all the latest videos and podcasts. Now, today in the show, we have got a very special guest. We've got Loren Baxter, a brilliant product designer from Felt in San Francisco, joining us to discuss really how they're revolutionizing the mapping industry. Now, we'll explore how Felt is making it more easier than ever to create maps. No matter if you're a beginner or a pro, so whether you're an urban planner or an everyday enthusiast like myself, their platform is designed to be as accessible and collaborative as possible. Something I didn't know about before, but after meeting Loren, I've started to use their product more and more. We're going to delve into how AI is transforming mapping and really making it smarter and more intuitive. Plus, we'll discuss some incredible success stories where Felt software played a crucial role in the disaster response in humanitarian efforts. Expect to hear about the challenges of specialised mapping within governments, the future of mapping with AI, and even how hotels and hospitalities are getting in on the action with interactive maps. It's super cool. I think you're going to love this episode. So whether you're involved in design, technology, or just love hearing about innovative tools that make life easier, this conversation is for you. Now let's get started, map out the future on this exciting field with Loren, and don't forget to like, comment, and share the video if you like it. Let's jump straight in. I'm delighted to have you on the podcast, Loren. We've been chatting back and forth, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more around what you're working on at the moment. And that's your dog in the background, but I'm delighted to have a dog as part of the podcast. It's the first. But look, we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do, and then we'll get into talking about the work that you're doing with Felt.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm excited to be here, and so is my dog Daisy. So I'm Loren. I've been a product designer for 15 to 20 years now, mostly in the Bay Area. So I live here in San Francisco, and I tend to work on early stage startups. So I've noticed myself really gravitating towards, being a founder or an early hire, and really building something from nothing into something. That's the stage I really love. I love working with small teams. So in the last sort of like 5 to 10 years, my journey has taken me through a lot of creative software startups. I think that's also a niche that I've discovered I love. So I have my own company called Prime, and we're building tools for photographers. So photo editing on the phone. It's just kind of in the heyday of, mobile photography really on the rise. After that, I joined a company called Remix, and they do mapping software for the people who plan transportation in cities. So you can think of it kind of like SimCity for the people who plan cities. Really, really cool software. You're really working on maps a lot. And so I ended up being product design there for a while, and then head of design, and I managed both our product and brand design teams for a few years. Remix was acquired in 2021, and I stuck around to kind of help the team navigate that transition. We got bought by a much bigger company called Via, who also does, public transportation stuff. And then, I wanted to get back to the early beginnings of companies. And so I joined Felt really early on. I had, through my time at Remix, encountered the way that people make maps in the world. Like our customers had mapping software. And I saw how, I think, much room there is for mapping software to become more usable, more accessible to lots of people. And that's what Felt is doing. I would describe it as sort of a Figma for maps. So I've been doing that for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's an area that probably for our listeners, they're probably saying, why are you talking about mapping software? Well, some of the early listeners of the podcast will realize that I have a deep, deep interest in visualization. And anything that creates alignment and shared understanding, to me, is an area that I'm really, really interested in. So this is really for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about something left field. And also, as we're going to learn, maps are, been around for a very, very long time. And, the future of maps is really, really important to how we actually live and work and collaborate. And especially as our services permeate society a lot more, it's really interesting and important to look at these kind of tools to how they evolve. So tell us a little bit more around the work that you're doing at Felt at the moment, because how long have you been in existence? Should we say about 2 or 3 years, is it?
Getting close to 3 years now. Yeah.
Very good. And your role is kind of, as you said, you've been in there from almost day dot. You're one of the first hires. What's it been like at that stage of coming into a business where maybe the proposition hasn't been completely formed, and you're still trying to find your feet? What was that whole experience like, and how did you navigate that? Did you have a map to work towards?
I see what you did there.
Jerry, that's hilarious.
Yeah, well, so I should have mentioned, so the CEO of Remix when I joined was this guy, Sam
Yeah.
Hashemi, formerly product designer,
Okay.
still has the product designer brain, but, is working in a CEO role. He
Awesome.
had left Remix and founded Felt. So I think we had like encountered together some of the same problems that we saw people working with maps having. And I think for him and for me, like had this experience where the like product idea that was keeping me up at night for years was this idea of like a Figma for maps. As a
Yeah.
product designer, I've gotten to watch my tools evolve so much over the last 20 years, and they're just incredible now. And when I
Mhm.
first encountered some of the mapping software out there, it's like really, really powerful stuff, but it feels like how it felt to me when I opened Photoshop, for the first time in like 1998, right? Just
Yeah.
overwhelmed with like buttons and kind of like, an older style of design, an older style of it's an installed application with like files that you have to save, and your like classic like version 2.0, 3.0 final like meme thing. And I was like, wow, I get to use tools like Figma and all these other amazing design tools that we have. And I have encountered this world of people who are doing what looks like design to me, right? They're making these beautiful artifacts. Maps are so impressive and cool and like intricate and elaborate. And they're using software that, is powerful, but is from like a previous generation and a lot of times. And so, honestly, what we've been doing is trying to bring that vision to life. And I remember on my first day, just thinking like my head was so filled with backed up ideas for the last few years that it was less of like finding the footing and more of like a hit the ground and start running, like just unleash all these ideas that have been kicking around. And we're lucky, right? Like we get to stand on the shoulders of giants and inherit a lot of philosophies and design patterns and things that you see in all these other software verticals, like in
Yeah.
design, documents, spreadsheets. So many pieces of software have been brought into the browser, and there's a lot of shared patterns, so we can really stand on top of that.
It's funny because as you're talking, I created an account on felt.com so I could get a much better understanding and what you're talking about.
It's that
And
easy.
no, but as you're, it was that easy actually. So someone's doing something well. But by the way, this isn't a paid podcast. So some people might going to go, "I'm endorsing Felt." I don't know. Like I'm at that point of just learning about this space. And as you're talking now, I completely start to see opportunities where I might use it. Okay, so one of the questions I had to you in the lead up to this is your target audience initially looks like it's, as you would call them, GIS experts or cartographers, is what I was calling them before I spoke to you today, Loren. But is there a shift then you want to try and scale and obviously make it more applicable for the likes of myself who are working in the community? You want to create greater sense of alignment, or even schools if they want to, or tourists, hotels if they want to identify proximity to them where the museums are and where the bus stop is that kind of the model now as you see it after 3 years where you're going?
Yeah, I would say, what we've seen is I think a lot of us, including folks like myself, we have not really learned to think in maps yet.
Yeah.
Obviously there's the like atlas type maps like Google Maps, Apple Maps, I can find stuff, I can navigate. It's a really mature product area. But it's not common to think like, hey, I have geospatial stuff like ideas, information about my world. Maybe I'm having a wedding. I want to like show where the wedding venue is and the hotel and the path, right? Or I'm doing a road trip. And often we aren't really taught to like think by creating a map for that stuff, even though it's like a really great artifact to do so.
Mhm.
And so I think what we've seen is that the people who do think in maps, the GIS experts, the cartographers, they love Felt because, of course, they're excited about software that's easier to use, faster, like runs in the browser, solves some of these classic problems you encounter with like file-based installed applications.
Yeah.
But they, then it kind of expands past them, right? And they're the ones who say, hey, look, to the people around them in their organizations or their friends and family, they say, look, you can make maps like me, right? But it's easy enough for you to do it now. And so I think that's where we kind of like start the circle and expand from there. And it is also really exciting to just see people who've like never even thought about making a map before find felt, and they're like, oh, cool. And then they just start making maps.
Like me now.
Yeah.
I'm already kind of saying, when I get off this, I'm going to make a couple of maps.
Yeah.
So, like, what are the challenges faced for people before Felt who wanted to create maps? What was their experience like to, I guess, explore that world within GIS or just maps generally? Like, was it just a case of people going to Google Maps and taking screenshots? Is that where we're at?
Quite a bit of that. Yeah. A lot of times I'm sure you'll look through your own, email inbox history or messages, and you will find screenshots of maps with, effectively like MS Paint kind of scribbles on top of, here's where the thing is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you were doing anything beyond that, there's this huge chasm, right? It was like, okay, you're doing really simple beginner stuff like that, big gap, and then you're like doing fancy stuff that you may need like even a degree or like an enterprise software license from the organization you work for to even have access to the software, to know how to use it. I remember for me, my first try, right, there's this software called QGIS, which is incredible. It's an open source mapping platform, QGIS. It's so powerful. And I remember when I was working at Remix, I needed to make a map for like a design prototype I was making. And I was like, okay, I need this map. It needs to have a few lines and some words on it. So I went to Google and I typed like map making software free, and I found QGIS and installed it just with a lot of hubris. I was like, oh, I could figure this out in a few minutes. And I just ran into a brick wall, right? It was like, Loren, you need to look at YouTube tutorials for a few hours before you're going to even be able to get started with this software.
Yeah, it's pretty complex.
And, not to knock it, because QGIS is made for GIS people, right? It's not made so that like literally everyone can just super easily make a map, and it's super powerful stuff. We love QGIS. We have a QGIS plugin. There are a lot of people who use QGIS and then send their maps into Felt. But for someone like me who really didn't know what was going on, it was really, really, the learning curve is very steep. And I think with Felt, it's a lot easier to just get started.
So what's that whole experience like? Because if you're trying to understand the whole kind of experience of creating alignment, it doesn't typically happen, at the same time. There's a lot of asynchronous kind of experiences happening to make that understanding occur. So how does Felt approach that kind of three-dimensional experience approach where you want to avoid creating a static image? You want to create an experience that allows the information to be rolled out, so to speak, to make the context richer. Is that something that you see? Because I notice on the interface here, like you've got share. And so I know you're already thinking about this, but what does that experience look like as you play it back to the other person that you're trying to create alignment with?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so fun to use the patterns we've seen success on from so many other kinds of software, like Google Docs, right? They took, but prior to that, you had Microsoft Word files on your computer and all the attendant problems that come with like, here's this version, and then I email it to you, and you send me comments back and make another version, and it just becomes a mess really quickly. Figma did the same with design. We were sharing files and screenshots with each other, and now it just happens in one place in the browser, or in software that's basically a browser. And so Felt does that, right? It's the maps live at a URL, the whole application runs in the browser, and it's multiplayer from the start, so you can get in there with your collaborators, and your cursors are flying around, you're doing stuff at the same time, you can leave comments and mention each other. So like we didn't invent these software patterns, but they really haven't existed in mapping in a robust way, and we just said, hey, like, of course this should be on maps, right? It should be exactly the same to collaborate on like a Google Doc, right? Or a Google Sheet. Like you should be able to do those things on a map. It's the same set of problems. At least that sort of collaborative layer. Of course, mapping does have its own specialized problems too.
Sure. I remember when Apple Maps came out, there was this whole kind of comparative opportunity to compare with, as I'd like to call it, the main source of truth of Google Maps, because it's been around longer and the data seems to be a little bit better. That's my experience anyway. I'm still on Android on a Pixel. But the standardized tools or the data sources that you have within Felt, how accurate are those maps that are in there? Like, where's that source coming from? Of, say, when I pull in here, I'm looking at Dublin and Ireland. So, is that something that's proprietary to Felt, or is it coming in from Google or Apple? Talk me through about the data and how you're handling those capabilities.
Yeah, sure. So there's many different parts that kind of contribute to a map, and that's one cool thing is like a map is
Yeah.
so dense with information, and so there's multiple sources. I would say one of the foundational ones is something called OpenStreetMap. If you haven't heard of it, it's sort of
Okay.
like
Yeah.
Wikipedia for like map data, right? So
Yeah.
contributors around the world for many, many years now have, basically done citizen mapping and created a map of the world that is open source, right? It's not,
Mm.
like Google's proprietary data. And so anyone can use it. We use it. Felt would not exist without OpenStreetMap.
Yeah.
So that's one source. Now then there's like satellite data. We get our satellite data from a provider called Mapbox. Satellite
Yeah.
data is a whole different beast, right? And what you're doing with satellite data is stitching together satellite imagery from around the world. And of course, satellites only take pictures of little strips of the world. So it's really this big mosaic. They're taken at different times. It's hard to kind of stitch them together. And then also when you zoom in and out, right? Zooming way out, that's a satellite image. But when you zoom way in and you're looking at like, your street and the city you live in, that's an aerial image that was taken from a plane, right? So it's actually a really
Yeah.
hard problem to stitch all of that together. So, we buy satellite imagery from Mapbox, and
You
so on, right?
integrate
There's
it.
just this huge stack of like sources that we weave together to create something like the map
Yeah.
inside of Felt.
So let's talk about like a success story, I guess, from Felt's perspective. This is your opportunity to kind of let the jack out of the box. For me, in my perspective, when I lived in Australia, whenever the fires would happen, like in the bushfires, and they wanted to try and enable very quick data to be released to the public of where the fires were, where the directions of the winds were going, where the projected fire was going to be in 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, and so forth, because it moves so quickly. I remember at that time the data was usually out of date by the time it hit the TV. So the quickest source was the internet. Tell me about how this kind of solution would enable those problems to kind of, I wouldn't say disappear, but be mitigated somewhat.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so Felt is really, really fast and really
Yeah.
easy to get going. So we do see a lot of disaster response, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's super easy for anyone to create a map, and you can just start drawing stuff, right? Like here's where the fire is. These roads are closed. Here's the place where people are meeting up, like the place where they can sleep and be safe since they've had to evacuate their homes.
Yeah.
So we've seen a bunch of that. Similarly, I've seen a ton of like humanitarian and journalism response in the conflict in Gaza. So people mapping like,
Oh, yeah.
where are these people that we're trying to evacuate, right? Where was their last known location? Where have, pulling in aerial imagery and looking at where damage has happened. We see this in, in multiple disasters like hurricanes, fires, even after the fact, analyzing aerial imagery and saying like, which houses were destroyed, which houses were damaged, which ones are still standing. So, it's just really easy to work quickly in Felt. And I guess
Yeah.
I would add that one thing that's difficult to work with in mapping is the data, because it's in all kinds of
Mm.
formats. There's esoteric stuff you have to know about, like what projection the data is in. Is it like a spherical globe or one of the, the like orange peel looking one that you saw in elementary school? And that kind of stuff you don't want to have to think about. So we've worked
Yeah.
really, really hard at Felt to make it so you can just take any piece of geospatial data, drop it on the map, and we just figure it out, right? And just render it on the map. So again, we're just trying to remove the complexity for people and make it really, really fast so that,
Mm.
for whatever you need to do, you can just get going.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other scenarios that your prime customer could be. Could you tell us, based on your experience over the last couple of years, we've talked about disaster responses. What about local councils or governments and how they're planning their cities? Because I'm sure that's a case if they're just using Google Maps as a source of truth and just drawing over it. How would that change, and how would it help enable better outcomes for governments when they're planning? urban improvements.
Yeah. Well, I'll give governments more credit. They do have like pretty robust mapping stacks, right? And they're using a lot of this
Maybe in San
software
Francisco. Maybe in San
that
Francisco.
yeah. They do like governments are actually
Yeah,
quite good at this because they've been doing planning for a long, long time. But I
sure.
think, what you see in places like governments doing planning is that, it still is really specialized within the organization, right? So the
Yeah.
person or the small group of people making maps are the like GIS specialists, right? And
Mhm.
you'll see this bottleneck where other people in government or in organizations say like, hey, we need a map of this or we need that data. And they'll like file a request over to the GIS team who are, inundated with requests and just trying to keep up. And I think if, for anyone on this podcast who does design, you may have experienced this yourself in the past, like being this sort of like design ticket machine where requests come in and you send designs out. And it's like not really a role that you want to play ultimately. You want to be more of an enabler, right? To sort of empower everyone to be making maps. And so I think that's what we're seeing with Felt as well, where they say, hey, now everyone in this organization, it has much more access to like making and working with and communicating around our maps. But we definitely
Yeah.
see that in planning of all kinds, right? Like you're looking at a park, you're looking at disadvantaged neighborhoods. Where are we going to put, new infrastructure or invest in community outreach or, what have you? It's just when you start to look at it, like so many discussions like are better had on maps because you're talking about, something that exists in space.
Yeah. As you were talking, I'm building a map out in real time. I
Oh,
might try and
nice.
share my screen in a minute. And I've just realized it's just clicked for me when I added a layer. I didn't realize what the layer was, and I added in the bike lanes. I
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
what's the bike lanes of San Francisco? That's not gonna make a difference to the Dublin. I'm like, no, it has the data sources for all the bike lanes in Dublin, folks. So I can see it's like everything. You go in and you have a play with it, and you kind of go, oh, okay, I know what this does now. So I could see why it could be very powerful, and it could be very beneficial. But is the expectation that, you might get somebody in here every couple of days or maybe once or twice a year to create a map? What's that experience looking like for you as a product designer when you're designing those things? Because from my perspective, if I have people coming to stay, or if I'm putting on an event in Dublin or something like that, I might create a bespoke map. Talk to me
Mhm.
about those kind of challenges and, how you want to work with that.
Yeah. So I think, on the end that you're describing, right? Like, hey, it's, you or me were making a simple map once in a while for, yeah, people visiting, or I have an Airbnb and, I want to like have my guests have a cool map of the local area of where to go. Or I want to like complain to my government about the bike lanes and like, here's
Yeah,
this street with a bad bike lane and people are getting, having bad interactions between pedestrians and cars. Felt should be super approachable for that kind of person, right? Because you're not
yeah,
going to be a map expert. It should be, and like really simple stuff like, hey, if I want to like draw a line, there's a tool. It's a line drawing tool. I draw it. And like it really, you open advanced GIS software and it's just not that simple. You have to know all these other concepts. Like, okay, I'm going to create a data layer. It's a line based data layer. And then I will define the attributes the line needs to have. And then I can draw a line. So just blowing all that away and making it like a draw. But then for the people who are coming in every day for work, there's so much depth to the power and advanced use of what people need to make maps, and we've invested really really heavily in that, like working with data, doing spatial transformations, like all this fancy jargon that I won't linger on too much, but that we've invested a huge amount of time in making this mapping software that as a mapping professional you can use for your job every single day.
yeah. Okay, I can see the power of this. So in some ways, like I totally connect where you're using the reference of Figma for maps. But based on the research that you and the team have been doing at Felt, where do you see it going now that AI has kind of arrived into the conversation of every client's mouth at the moment? How do you think that's going to reshape the service that you're providing? What is
I
the
think AI
future
is
of mapping?
I think AI is only going to make things better for everybody. I think one thing that AI is pretty good at is being an interface between you and something structured, right? So a lot of times
Mm.
if you ask AI, you're like, hey, just, tell me about this thing. It'll have hallucinations. It'll, you have to fact check it. You have trouble trusting it. I'm hopeful that that problem is solved, but that's definitely the current state of the world.
Yeah.
Um, but for example, there's software called Overpass Turbo, and that it's like a cool little, you can find it online. And what that does is allow you to get data out of OpenStreetMap, right? And you can just say, hey, Overpass Turbo, like get me all the, parks in Dublin. I want a geospatial data file of all the parks in Dublin, right? But to do that, you actually do have to like construct sort of a query, and that's of course a fancy thing to sort of learn and know how to do. But a thing like AI is really, really good at writing fancy queries to get data out of something for you, right? It's good at this kind of like, coding based interaction. So I think that's one example of a place where AI may make it a lot easier to sort of get at and work with data. But in the end, I think what people are doing is like communicating with each other, right? They're making decisions, they're making plans, and that kind of stuff is not what AI does, right? Like AI is going to help you in that process, but ultimately, if you're making a decision about, which park do we need to spend our budget on improving, right? You're not going to ask AI that. You're going to have that discussion within your city parks department and come up with an answer. And so felt is a really good piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, pretty much. One of the questions I have, because it's kind of a very unique product in the sense that I haven't seen too many people working in this space. And I guess I'm flicking between two different modes here, folks. I'm trying to understand the product, but I'm also interested in the challenge that Loren had or experiences when designing this product. Like, so you've worked in Prime, as you said, your own business a couple of years ago. What's been the biggest challenge to date with felt that you've kind of faced when designing this product?
I think it's a challenge that I love. It's this like designing for the spectrum of experience, right? Designing a product where you say, hey, if someone who's literally never made a map before, they can come in and they can use this, right? Like that is the baseline. And someone who is a like seasoned professional would come in here and use it and find it powerful, fast, and valuable for them. And that's a really hard line to walk. I mean, and I think every designer relates to that idea of trade-offs between usability and power. I really enjoy designing for that. And I think actually my top inspiration is operating systems like Mac OS, right? Because again, people all over the world use Mac OS. People who are not that technical open it up and they can, send email and browse the internet and do these things. But if you're a developer, you can get down in there and you're coding system files and doing all this deep stuff. And it's just really amazing how it allows you this ability to interact at a simple level, but to like push deeper, and it just keeps offering more as you do that. And I think that that's been what we've gone for at Felt.
So if we gave you the full reins of Felt, so we managed to move your peers out of the way, and you're going to have all the decisions based on what you've learned over the last 3 years. What would be the kind of core features that you'd love to see involved in the roadmap for the next couple of months and the next couple of years at Felt? What are the bits that you're most excited about?
Yeah, well, what's fun, because our CEO is a product designer, we partner so much, like what we're doing is what I want, and not because like I said so, but because we have this mind meld, right? I think we are deep product thinkers, and so it's been really amazing to not have to sort of convince leadership of like this or that design thing, right? It really is centered at the forefront of what we're doing. So something that we've been working on right now, if you can put data into Felt, it becomes fairly static after that. You upload it, we process it, there it is, it's really fast. Of course, organizations have data that's alive, right? You have your database, there's a bunch of stuff in there, but it changes over time. And of course, you're going to want to hook that into a map and then watch that map change and be able to work around that. I'm really excited for that because I think it just takes these artifacts from being something that's kind of, potentially like the end of a process. You kind of like get to the map and there it is, it's done, and you communicate around it for a while. And then, eventually it kind of like becomes an artifact of the past. And, the ability to hook up things that live inside of Felt and continue to update and that you can continue to collaborate around, I think will bring a huge amount of value. So that's something we've been working on. I'm really excited to deliver.
So it's one thing to look at this in the browser. What's it like I want to try and understand the experience of the person on the mobile, the mobile user who's got sent a link like this, who maybe requires contextual information that the person on the desktop has kind of triggered. What's that experience like for that person to be played back? Is it like a video format? Is it an interactive canvas? Tell me what
It's
that
just
looks
a
like.
map. Yeah, you open it up in your browser on your phone, and
And the
it's a
layers are
map
put
right
across
there.
it. And the
Everything's
layers are
there.
put,
Yeah. Of
yeah.
course, we've obviously slimmed down the UI, so we don't offer editing on the mobile. I think that's something we're interested in, but of course, the whole UI doesn't just fit naturally on a phone. So what we've really prioritized thus far, I mean, we're a small team, so what we've prioritized is like the viewing experience, right? So if I've made my my road closures map because there was an avalanche or a fire and I need to get that out, of course, a ton of the people who arrive at that map are going to be coming from their phones, right? And so the experience of viewing that, browsing around it, like understanding it needs to be top class. And they're not going to install an app, right? They're going to look at it on their browser, on their phone. Browser. Yeah.
One of the areas like Ireland, I don't know if you've ever been to Dublin, but we rely heavily on tourism. So when I kind of understand from the perspective of Tourism Ireland and a lot of the tourism boards in Ireland and the hotels, I see this as being really powerful from Airbnb's perspective and, B&B's perspective and hotels' perspective, and being able to create unique experiences for their visitors. Is that something that you're seeing more and more of, more hotels taking ownership of these kind of things? And can they share those? Like, is there one kind of community that you can tap into for, like, say, somewhere like Dublin? Is that something you've explored yet?
We've seen a bit of that. I think that what we've seen in terms of the sort of hospitality, hey, our guests need a map kind of use case, tends to be people who I would say are, the like early adopter types, or who are just looking around the internet, like, what's cool out there? Are there new tools? I'm gonna check them out, right? And they come get felt, and maybe they have an Airbnb that they host, and they're like, yeah, they make a map. In terms of hotels, it's one of those worlds where there's not even a mapping function at all. Usually, like, they don't have a GIS specialist at the hotel, right? And so I think it's a great example of the kind of industry where people aren't even thinking in maps yet. And I'm excited for us to get to this point where even the person managing a hotel might think like, hey, it would be really cool to offer an interactive map to our guests, right? But I think that's something that, a story that's still to be told, really.
And people could feed into it. All the guests could feed into it and rank and stuff. So you can get this. I
have been to Dublin, by the way. I went to Interaction Design Conference 2012 in Dublin, and it was great.
Yeah, it's when I was in Australia. So I think probably 2012 to 20, like, I came home 2018 to Dublin, and from the time I left in 2006 to 2018, it's a completely different city, completely different country. So you're overdue, is what I'm trying to say to you. You need to come back now and experience it. Like, people say it's kind of like San Francisco, where with all the tech companies floating around here and making the rents so expensive for everyone else. Probably
similar lives.
Probably similar to San Francisco in that way. But I'd love to see how this evolves and see how this grows. And definitely, if there's any opportunity for people in the community to get involved and try out the tool, is there a free option for people to go and have a play and have an explore of the product?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can sign up for Felt for free. You play with a ton of the features, some of the really fancy spatial transformations and stuff that usually you need a GIS degree to kind of know about would be behind a paid plan. But for folks like you and I, it's really dead simple to get in there and make a map, and it's free. We're always going to have a free personal tier. Really where we see the seam for payment, right, is when people are using it professionally, in an organization that has budget, right? But if you're making something for a hiking trip, a road trip, that's the kind of stuff that we want everyone to be able to do for free.
One of the things I get all the time, Loren, is, because I interview a lot of people on the podcast, people can go, hey, I have a friend coming to Dublin. Can you recommend somewhere that is not too expensive, but they also want a place that's in proximity to the museums? And I'm like, all right. So usually I end up writing a big long email, but with something like this, I could probably weave a loom together with a demonstration or potentially a couple of links to a map and saying, hey, listen, look, go to the coffee shop. This is where it is, and this is where I see the value in what you're doing with it at the moment. So I wish you the very best of luck with it. I think it's anything that, kind of pushes the boundaries and creates greater sense of alignment and purpose can only be a good thing. And I've been trying to, check myself and saying, is there anything that I can just question around the ethics of this? But I think it's just, you've covered off all the main points. I'm sure people listening have got questions for you. What's the best way for people to reach out and connect with you directly, Loren?
Yeah, you can find me at Loren Baxter on, I'm always going to call it Twitter forever. That's LORENBAXTER.
Yeah.
And I'm on Threads, and you can find me anywhere on the internet. I love chatting with folks, so please do reach out.
I'll put a link to your LinkedIn as well in there, because it seems to be one of the most popular places for our listeners to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'll throw a link to Felt, of course, in there as well. So folks, if you are interested in this space and wanting to learn a little bit more around how to create maps, just click on the link in the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the description. Loren, thanks so much for everything and getting up early. I know you're in San Francisco, so you had to get up super early to chat to me. I really, really appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great chatting with you. And yeah, I'm excited to come visit you in Dublin and have you show me all the greatest spots.
Next week. See you next week, okay, right? So book a flight and you'll be here next week.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it.